Okay, I think we can get started. It's exactly 2:20. Hi, today we are going to be talking about from code to experience. It's sort of how do we build user-centric features together in sort of a very handoff-ish culture. So more about myself. My name is Yazan Obeidat. I'm a consultant based in Dubai. I've worked with two startups, Expedia and Amazon, not so much popular, and a proud co-founder of two companies, one called Nusepia, which is sort of the UX and design arm, and the second company is Aspedex, which is more of the tech arm. We have partnerships with Liferay, and we do mainly governmental, let's say, excellence-based projects. Going over to, let's say, more about Nusepia, it's sort of an agency that specializes in building user experiences for AI products, not necessarily integrating AI workflows with sort of childlike creativity involved. So I think let's get started. So in this day and age, we sort of want to ask ourselves, why siloed handoffs sort of weaken products? It's not really working out. And what I mean by handoff culture, I'll give a very good example about, and I won't mention any names so I don't get sued. There is a company that sort of hand-offs 40 features per month. That's a bit of excessive in terms of handing over so many features. And so we're talking about 80 products in 2 months, 80 features, and then it goes on and on and on. So this sort of dilutes the entire purpose of the core functionalities. You sort of have you sort of become a feature factory in the end of the day. We want to try to avoid that. So here's how it usually goes in terms of the process. So currently, designers hand over, devs they build, and of course, this sphere would represent that feature. And business hope it works out, which in reality it does not. With any insufficient testing, anything that really doesn't exceed expectations. So what can we take away from this? Sometimes without collaboration, elegant design, or having the best robust code still fails out. It doesn't really work out. And nobody really cares in this day and age about quality. So I wanted to take some time and present real business cases. So think of, let's say, the handoff culture as sort of a trifecta. One for product, one for experience design, and the other for business. So let's look at examples of a purely business-led product. Again, it's going to be full of dark patterns, plagued with monetization tricks, and these monetization tricks can sometimes lead users to sort of trick them into purchasing something they don't really need. I could mention a few. Poor usability. Sometimes the product is really integrated within business. You just don't know how to use that product in the end. So I'll be very surprised if anybody in the audience can sort of guess which website this is. Again, it's not necessarily an example of having. So this screen right here is trying to extort people out of money. What is extortion? You're trying to get somebody to buy something without their consent. But this company, I'll mention it in the end of this example, is trying to extort you. So you sort of hit the extort button, you keep putting the plus, it's $1, $2, and it informs you that yes, you are being extorted, but think of it in a real world scenario where, no, sometimes these companies can actually extort real world users without their consent. And this usually happens with having or adding unnecessary features when you're trying to check out from a product, something that is already toggled, you have a checkbox, and you don't know what's happening. How come I'm being charged an extra $1 or $5? But this company, again, you've successfully been extorted, is basically the end. It's a company, it's a Canadian company called dbrand, and they do it in a very fun way. They do have an extort type of, let's say, feature, but where they're being very transparent with users in terms of having their consent. Another example, and I'm not sure if anybody remembers the era of 2008. It was a very weird era back then. There was an app called I'm Rich. It was for $999. And it was a developer called Armin Heinz. He actually made this as sort of a joke. This is a very good example about a very business-centric product. So 8 people fell victim to it, unfortunately. And then Apple had to sort of take it out of the App Store, and they refunded all those poor victims back their money. So here's a personal experiment of mine. I tried to delete my Facebook account 2 days ago. Good luck with that. It took me around 15 minutes before I sort of gave up and I had to just Google how to delete my account. It was, yeah, I mean, it's a very questionable practice. Back in Amazon, I believe, back when I was working there, you would have to actually go into, surprisingly, not the accounts page, the settings. You'd have to go all the way down to the footer. You would have to open up a chat support with an agent and beg them, please, just delete my account. I don't want it anymore. So we've looked at the business-centric mindset. Let's look at more of a designer mindset. And the reason why I chose this photo is sometimes I am one of them, we have our heads in the clouds. We don't necessarily think about the next person in the pipeline, which is, of course, the developers, which is you guys, a majority. We want to make something that's really elegant, but that's very, very hard to implement. Or, of course, everybody knows the saying for developers. Everything can be implemented. But how much resources would it take? Will it take 2 weeks? Will it take 6 months? Maybe a year? So this is what I meant by having dream designs that sort of can't be built in a very realistic sense. Everything can be built, but again, unrealistic expectations and timelines. Again, here we're celebrating some failures. Snapchat's old redesign, this was back in 2018. I remember back then I was in Wadi Rum. I was an advocate fan of Snapchat. I just couldn't use it after the update, and I ended up not capturing anything. So this ended up isolating around 3 million daily active users at the time of the update. And of course, the new update, if we look at the before and after, the before was sort of for getting all of these organizations into one belt, and the after had a very pleasing aesthetic. It looked better than the old one. And of course, there was just several features launched during this time which basically isolated the user base. There was nothing, they couldn't use the app. It was unusable. And they had to, of course, revert back. It was a complete disaster. I'm not sure if anybody remembers a product called Juicero. Juicero is quite interesting for me personally because it is a juicer. Yes, it does have Wi-Fi. And in order to use this juicer, this is a product that basically makes juice. If it blends, you can make juice, basically. You can make carrot juice, orange juice, cucumber juice. And the reason why it has Wi-Fi is you had to sort of scan a QR code, which comes in these pre-made packets. And if the Wi-Fi was sort of glitchy, you're unable to make juice, which is very surprising. This, I think it lasted for a year, and then they killed it. And to top it off, it was $400. Now, how does this relate to a design? It looked futuristic. It was out of its time. It was a very futuristic, sleek aesthetic, so to say. So if we go to sort of a modern era of examples, we have the R1 Rabbit. Think of having ChatGPT in your pocket, which can talk to you. So you attach it here, such as this microphone. But the thing is, the battery life, I mean, it looks cool. It would be cool to have an AI talking in your head most of the time, but it only lasted for 2.5 hours. So it wasn't really functional. It didn't really meet the development requirement. Or, again, having its cool, sleek design aside, it just failed to have or implement basic commands, such as, can you just remind me on this specific date or time or this calendar to I have an appointment at 2 o'clock. It failed to do a very basic, simple task. Good design, functionality, 0. We go back to 2007 and we look at Windows Vista. So Vista, I'm sure everybody is very, very excited about Apple's liquid glass. But actually, you'll be surprised, it was Vista who was the first ones to implement this new OS design. And this OS design introduced a very frosted glass. But the thing is, it was ahead of its time. When we look at technology, you always have to sort of, is it ready for this sort of era or this day and age? So timing is very crucial when we're going to be launching products. So it had a very, let's say, it introduced very heavy transparent animations, amazing delights, and of course animations and effects. But it just drained the performance and slowed down machines. So it was unusable for basic computers, especially for Windows, which is way slower than Mac. That's, of course, my bias. And, of course, we look at the purely dev-led based products. So as a developer, you don't care how it looks. It's fast, it's functional, but when I mean unusable is, I mean, no ordinary human being can, of course, comprehend what you're building. Think DOS. Here's a very good example, and this was back in the day, the ChatGPT. There was something called Ask Jeeves, which I remember a cousin of mine, he sort of pranked me. I thought it was actually responding back to me at that time, and my mind was really blown away. So it was back in 1999. It was a natural language search engine. So similar to, let's say, Google, where you type in, I'm looking for a website, I'm looking for a restaurant, you would ask it in a very, let's say, user-centric language, and it would sort of respond back to you with the search query. That's what made it really advanced at that time. But it just looks so horrible, man. Let's just be real. Another tragic tale of our modern era. We're looking at Builder.ai. And why did I put this? I had a huge internal debate in mind. Should this be business-led? Because it was sort of a scam, and hopefully I don't get sued by them if they're still around. So Builder.ai, for those who don't know, was a well-funded company from Silicon Valley. And you would sort of input your prompts. So you would put in a prompt for, let's say, I want to build a personalized gym app. And this tool or this product would generate that app for you. Real code, you can literally use it. But the thing is, there was no AI behind it. It was just a smoke and mirrors charade. They were using Indian developers, unfortunately. It's, again, a Greek tragedy. But, hey, it works. It's still functional. The 2017 era remote style for Samsung. Another great example of function over form, I would say. So every button technically worked. Many users, you just couldn't figure out how do I switch to HDMI. And who's going to read this instruction manual? No one's going to have the time or to bother. This is where we're celebrating sort of failures of these products. And this is the importance of iterating over time. Right now, I mean, we got a sleek remote, such as this example. Yeah, especially the new iterations of the Samsung 2000s and 20s era, pre-COVID, is way sleeker than this. But there is a saying in user experience that if you need an instruction manual, then you just can't use it. Another final example for more of a dev-heavy, let's say, product would be IBM's Lotus Notes. It lasted for quite a decade, the 1990s to 2000s. It had a very clunky interface. And what this does is sort of a all-you-can-eat buffet type of tool. You can have your web navigator, you can have your journal, your proposals, all of this is going to be organized. But even though it was still functional, and it doesn't really appeal to the modern day user, it was very difficult to sort of navigate towards the upper sections, the catalogs, the vertical mails, and there's so much of a degree of customization where it really isolated the user base. Nobody could use it. So what is this? What do these three examples sort of tell us? It tells us that handoffs, they just waste time. They create friction, and of course they erode the user trust. And what I mean by user trust is, if this product looks good, but I can't use it in the end in terms of aesthetics, then it loses its credibility. So how do we solve the sort of handoff culture that we're currently in? Again, I want to sort of share, first and foremost, sort of a personal journey that I had to go through with having an agency in Dubai, and how we sort of proposed a different approach to how we wanted to tackle a specific project. So integration patterns, and how do we sort of leverage having developer in the room. So I'll give a very good example. So we were proposing for a client in Dubai. It was the Dubai Legal Affairs Department. What they wanted us to do was they wanted to have 70 services in a span of 4 months. It's like, yeah, sure, of course. Why not? Let's do it. So what we did was, and of course, at that time, the business guy who does the bylaws, so of course, you're doing these services, there has to be a manual, a guide for the designer, for the developer, in order to incorporate these rules. And these bylaws could be, I'll give you a very good example. If you wanted to sort of register your account using something called a UAE pass, which is the Sanad equivalent here in Jordan, you would have to have your Emirates ID ready on hand. At least you have to put in the Emirates ID code in order for us to sort of populate the information and have all of the database preset. But that wasn't the case. The guy who does the bylaws was nowhere to be found. He was working on another project through our partner. We had to bring him back, and we had to sort of streamline a specific process which was so integral towards delivering those 70 services in that time span. Now, did we meet expectations? Yes, to a certain degree. We had to extend the timeline due to some, let's say, lack of business requirements. But going back, I want to look at practical ways on how to integrate design and development workflows. So a designer does something in the back, a developer does something in the front. How do we sort of integrate these? So let's look at, of course, I'm going to explain this diagram. And I'm sure not all corporations or organizations do incorporate a design sprint. But assuming you do, a design sprint is to sort of roll out a prototype, a full-fledged working prototype within a span of 1 week. And this is sort of going into the idea and the learn. We're phasing out the build and the launch. So we're not really launching something that's fully fledged, something that you can use, but we are going to be doing something more akin to getting feedback from users. That way, in a week's time, we could test out one flow. For example, a checkout page, and we can actually gather feedback. But the thing is, a lot of the design sprints, and the main issue with it is it's just a lot of testing elements for. And these are let's say artifacts engineers could not use, and I'll get into more detail regarding this. There's going to be a lot of open-ended questions in regards to the test. So for example, if you go back to the example of the checkout page that we're prototyping, you have the question as, what if the checkout fails? What is the edge case? How do I document this for developers? If we go to a development sprint cycle, which is usually 2 to 4 weeks, it's way longer. Of course, it depends on the product and its complexity, et cetera, et cetera. There has to be sort of clear user stories. We have to also document edge cases. And what I mean by edge cases is error states. And of course, I'll showcase a better example of this. And we have to sort of have a shared understanding of why, what, and how. And this, going back to the circle, that sphere, is sort of a potentially shareable increment, which is a feature. now that we're very clear in sort of integrating or seeing the full bird's eye view of the workflow, I want to showcase what goes through a designer's mind when they're sort of designing something. So, a very good example is looking at a profile page. So, the designer shares a Figma. What do we usually see? A profile picture, a name field, email field, password change option could be there, somewhere there in the bottom. Just the presentation couldn't fit. But no notes on behavior, validation, or error handling whatsoever. So what does this do? How does the developer see this page? Do we validate an email? What happens if the password is too short? What happens? Are fields optional, or are they required? Is it something that's a must? What's the success/error rate? So a lot of guesswork has to be incorporated in, and this leads to, of course, inconsistent builds. The developer will just imagine stuff and you just implement whatever. And this will cause delays, which will lead business to go mad. So how do we convert these over to sort of an actionable Jira ticket? This is sort of, again, I know that most organizations don't use an acceptance criteria, but for this example, we'll just go about it. So instead of going back to having a profile picture, we just want to write down the conditions. A user can upload a profile picture, what specific type of document would be required for this picture. If we go back to sort of the name field, to make this into sort of actionable insights for the designers and for the developers, we'd have to specify that the name field is required 2 characters or max 50 characters long for those really long Arabic names, of course, and so forth and so forth. So this is sort of gluing together the 2 pieces of the puzzle. But again, if you ask me, Yazan, this is going to be more of a business type of tactic. What happens? How do I force the developers to collaborate with the designers and the business? Everybody has a name say. So imagine this. When was the last time a developer was sort of in a room discussing a product feature? And I want to sort of engage with the audience here. Has anybody been in that room wherein you were discussing a feature, how it's going to be built, what is the strategy behind it? Okay, not so much. Okay, amazing. So we want to see, of course, this is more akin to collaborating with user experience designers. Imagine the developer as sort of a UX stakeholder. He is sort of the gatekeeper and the ambassador for great functionality plus great aesthetics. Now, involving a developer in the room, he can easily spot performance mistakes, risks, load times. Having this nice, glassy, fancy animation could really slow down the product. Can we move it to phase 2? Can we shift it? Can we not do it at all? We also want the developer to sort of advocate for pushing back on imaginary designs. And this goes back to the example of designers over-designing something. It looks good on paper, business likes it. You can impress the C-level higher-ups with a nice fancy, let's say, animation. This is all UX theatrics. It's all show, but no function. So I would advocate for developers to sort of push back on these really complex artifacts or designs. And last but not least, we want developers to sort of share empathy, and I'll get to what empathy could translate for developers, by joining usability reviews. And usability reviews are sort of seeing if the product is usable in an actual prototype. It could be at any form or stage, if it's going to be in a Figma, if it's going to be actually developed, but you want to see if the product actually works. And how do these users sort of react to this particular product or flow? I'll give a very good example. So for a checkout, I go to a checkout, let's say flow. It's going to be asking me if I want to put cash or card. And let's say we're in a wrong demographic. We're in a country that cash is widely more popular than adding your credit card. The trust is not there for credit cards. So this is where the developer can actually recommend, hey, it's not within our demographic, within our reach. We can park this feature instead of spending a ton of time developing this feature for adding a credit card or a card at a later stage. And let's look at some collaboration patterns. We want to sort of improve speed. We want to improve efficiency. We want to look at sort of integrated feedback loops. And how do we sort of accomplish this? Integrated feedback loops are involving everybody from the team, from product, from QA, from development. We want to share continuous feedback, not during the development process, but of course after sort of a release. We can do this in certain milestones. We can do this in certain sprint bursts, when the sprint is nearing completion, getting early feedback. So I'll give a very good example. So imagine a designer has handed off a Figma link to you. Nice design, beautiful, good aesthetics. You as a developer, you would take it and work on it, remote, from the Caribbean, on vacation, anywhere. You would come back and you would ship it off. At this time, it's sort of too late to incorporate any feedback because most of the functionality has already been done. So it's a bit too late at this point. But getting feedback at a very earlier phase, not after post-launch, could enhance a product or feature. Let's look at sort of sharing an acceptance criteria. So imagine the business telling you, hey, we have to sort of do X, Y, Z accomplishments for this product. And the success criteria is, of course, we'll go with the basics. I want to increase conversion. And if only the business is thinking about these certain success criteria, and the UX, of course, he has to find his own way. As a developer, how do I sort of incorporate my own take on sort of increasing conversion? Now, a business take would be to sort of, we want to make the call to action more flashy. Instead of black, we can have it yellow. And design will focus on usability and positioning. As a developer, he could also interject that, hey, once a user hovers, it would sort of glow or give a more, let's say, prominent take. So this is what I meant by having more of a streamlined shared acceptance criteria together. And we're looking at, of course, the last one, which is joint retrospective post-launch. And this is sort of, if I want to go into more detail, you're going to be building sort of a shared learning experience. You want to align accountability. Usually, once you launch a feature or product, ownership is gone. Oh, okay, I'm done. Next, what's the next sprint? How do you sort of go back and sort of tweak and improve and enhance? So instead of, let's say, launching 40 features all in one go in a single month, you want to focus on maybe a realistic number would be, again, depends on the organization, several factors into it, but maybe 8. And you want to have continuous feedback and improvement within these 8 features. So we want to enforce and improve collaboration and have really great product quality. So let's break the silos. Let's build features together. And of course, we don't want to do it in handoffs. All right, thank you.